If you have not seen some of the headlines around this, Grok 2, which is Elon Musk's big AI model, just Grok 2 was released, which is their latest in the frontier model. And what was interesting to watch about this was when it first was announced, it made headlines as being the new frontier model. It broke a lot of benchmarks. People were really excited about what it could do. It had some new AI image capability, image generation capability. And so it was making headlines for, I guess you could say, good reasons. But that did not last very long, to say the least. And one of the things to note about Elon Musk's model, which is very much tied to some of the brand he's created around X or Twitter or whatever you're calling it, is he's very opposed to any sort of censorship or governance. He wants to just make this stuff kind of free reign. And we got to see what happens when you don't put guardrails on a frontier AI model very, very, very quickly. Now, I will warn you up front, I would not advise looking up some of this stuff. It is definitely not safe for work. And I would not advise it at all. You can read some articles if you'd like, just to kind of get a feel for it, but I'll describe it here. But basically, what people are doing is they're using the image generation capability because there are no restrictions. People went haywire with this because you could literally ask it to create images of anyone doing anything. And you can only imagine how quickly that went absolutely sideways. Now, before I address this, one of the things that I thought was interesting before we even get to its misuse was the fact that it was making headlines for how capable it was. Yet I was actually a little disappointed even seeing some of the stuff it came out with. It very much felt like, okay, you're trying to play catch up with the big players and you're late to the party. And actually, I felt like some of this, yeah, we're not going to put restrictions on it, was really because there wasn't a whole lot of interesting stuff that it had to offer. So it was kind of more of a shock and awe. Yeah, well, not only is ours now competing, look at what we can do now. We don't have rules for our model, which I I just don't like when things turn into that, where it's like I don't have anything interesting to contribute, so now I'm just going to shock and awe people with, showing how much I don't have to follow the rules. Now, granted, can't speak to Elon's motives or intent or what he was trying to accomplish with that. So I don't want to say that's necessarily what was going on, but it very much felt like, okay, you're, a lagger in what you have to offer. And so you're going to try and impress everybody by not having rules on your model, which it's not that the other models are perfect, but this one, that was kind of one of its headlines was, hey, we don't have all those pesky rules that the other models do. And I chuckled a little bit, but where I was like, well, you kind of got what you had coming to you by doing that. I mean, I have talked at length about the risks of not having rules around these models and what can happen when you don't govern and restrict this, and how Gen AI is different than former AI models, where it will do pretty much anything unless it's specifically trained not to do it. So it's not like previous models where you have to say, okay, we got to tell you what to do. It'll literally do whatever unless you rein it in. And so coming to market with a model with none, or maybe very, very limited restrictions, because I did read some additional stuff saying like, no, they did claim that you couldn't make, deep fakes of specific people. But honestly, people were making images of Elon. They were making images of presidential candidates. They were making images of Disney characters and cartoon. I mean, it was just absolute chaos, absolute chaos. Now, I haven't stayed close enough. This just happened this week, so I'm not sure if they've tried to rein it in. One of the things that I did think was interesting was how very quickly people who oppose Musk were using it to create a bunch of deepfake images of Elon Musk doing things. And one of the things that was interesting to watch was very quickly Elon Musk started to not look like Elon Musk in these deep fakes. So I think there was some effort going on to try and mitigate some of the risk, but it wasn't happening across the board. And one of the things that, caught some headlines, you may have seen this, especially if you're in the US and it's political season. Trump is taking some major heat for basically creating some deep fakes of Taylor Swift endorsing his candidacy, which Swifties have taken, to the to the streets, kind of opposing this. And anyway, but a lot of this was all based on Grok 2. And what happens when you create one of these large language models and you say, yeah, you know what, we are just going to let people govern themselves. And what we saw, so so let me say it this way. There were two things that really stood out to me on this that I think we should really take into consideration. And no matter where you sit, I think you should be kind of reevaluating this. First of all, one, there's the technology side. And I understand where people are coming from when they say, I don't like the idea of these models being, governed, having censorship around them. And I understand there are legitimate risks that censorship and governance around these models has the risk to be biased. It absolutely does. And so I genuinely understand where people are coming from when they're skeptical of some of these models being governed and how are they being governed and what restrictions are being in place and what measures are going into ensuring that the governance that's being applied to them isn't unfairly biased towards a certain group of people or towards a certain, political affiliation or race or whatever. And I think those are legitimate concerns to have. However, I think Grok 2 and its decision to go, we're going the opposite way and saying, we're just going to let people govern. We got to see real quick how sideways that goes. And so I hope if you're somebody who thinks that we should not have governance and we should just trust people to do what they want to do with it and govern, self-regulate with these models, I hope that what we've seen happen with Grok 2 in honestly less, I mean, it took minutes from its release before people were already going, whoa, this is going to cause lawsuits. This is going to cause mass misinformation. This is going to cause, I mean, it was absolute chaos in a matter of minutes. And so I hope if you're someone who is rightfully skeptical of governance and are so far skeptical that you believe that we shouldn't have any, I actually hope Grok 2 helps illustrate why we do need to have governance around these models. There needs to be restrictions in place, and we can argue and we can debate where those lines should be drawn. But where we shouldn't draw the line is just don't do anything with it. Now, granted, this is just image stuff like this, but I mean, there's risks of if we don't govern this stuff, people could use AI to, you know, help them manufacture biological weapons and I mean, create massive hacks. And so there's tons of stuff in addition to just, so if you're somebody who's writing it off going, oh, what's some harmless images being created? Well, first of all, one, they actually can cause tremendous harm. And so there's that. Like I would say there's significant risk, even just with this image generation. But as you start thinking about even bigger implications, it gets exponentially worse when we don't have governance. So my hope is to people who are skeptical that you at least can see what happened with Grok 2 and go, oh, okay, fair enough. We should have some sort of governance around this. Now, let's debate where that governance lies and what kind of accountability we have in place and who's involved in making those decisions. Absolutely. I am absolutely an advocate for that and am doing a fair amount of work to try and encourage and be involved in that kind of stuff because I do think we need diverse minds together talking about where we draw those lines. But what I don't think we need is people going, we don't need those lines because this week we saw how serious this stuff can go sideways. Now, I think on the individual level, I think this was very much an insight into the human condition, which is we don't operate well when we don't have boundaries. And I know there's often this, and I'm one of them. Okay. I hate feeling like I'm being confined by rules. I hate it. But I've actually leaned into that and recognized more and more that boundaries and guardrails are actually a really healthy thing. And actually, I've been looking into some research about this. And actually, people perform better when there are reasonable guardrails around them. Now, I think some of the overreaction to that is we've all been in that draconian kind of micromanaging environment where it's not healthy. And I agree that that's not what we should get to. But I think this, again, on an individual level, if you're someone who firmly believes that, like, I don't need rules, I don't need boundaries, I should just be allowed to do whatever I want, I would challenge you to think differently about it, because we're seeing what happens when people are allowed to do whatever you want. And it doesn't take long. And if you think, oh, I'd be the exception, well, first of all, I would argue, no, you won't. And secondly, I would say, yeah, well, even if hypothetically you were the exception, we clearly have enough data to show that there are plenty of people who would not make that exception clause and are going to do tremendous harm without guardrails. And so if we can sacrifice a little bit of latitude of what we're allowed to do for the sake of protecting the masses from some of the chaos that we're seeing when we turn off boundaries and guardrails on this, I think it's well worth it. So again, you can disagree with me. I am more than happy to have an open discussion about that, but this to me was just a frontline example of what happens when we let these extremely, extremely powerful technological tools off their leash. I mean, and it's not the model itself, it's what people do with the model. And I think that's another kind of highlight from this, is that Grok 2 itself is not doing anything. It's just doing what people want. And so when I see people pointing the finger and yelling at Grok 2, I would say, well, actually, even some of the things you're upset about, be angry at the people behind it who are making decisions to say, nah, we're not going to govern it because we don't believe in rules. Well, hang on. That's obviously not going to go very well. So, no shortage of chaos around Grok 2's release this week. And yeah, I think it'll be a lesson learned for, hopefully it influences the way a lot of these other frontier models start thinking. And maybe when they're tempted to kind of push the boundaries of, maybe we loosen our restrictions a little bit, I hope that this makes them think twice about that.